Hey guys, welcome back to Remove Before Race, and now following on from our 992 full review, it's time for another Porsche. And while the rest of the world is looking at their first ever electric car, the Taycan, we're going to focus on their next combustion pure petrol turbo car, and that is the brand new Porsche Cayenne Coupe in turbo form. Today's video has been sponsored and approved by ExpressVPN. I spend a lot of time using public Wi-Fi at hotels, press events, and coffee shops, especially when we go on press trips to review new cars. But using public Wi-Fi runs the risk of hackers stealing our credit cards or personal data, even our social media accounts, something that would be disastrous in my position. Using ExpressVPN means your internet data is encrypted, thus putting a stop to this risk, and it only costs less than $7 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Take back your internet privacy today and find out how you can get 3 months free thanks to us at RBR by clicking the link in the description box, expressvpn.com/RBR. Take back your privacy today with ExpressVPN. Now, the episode. So, SUV Coupes. Now, with SUV Coupes, the first question that anybody ever asks when a model comes out is, why does this even exist? And that's a similar question as to what was posed when the first Porsche SUV came into existence. Why does this exist? Now, today, we've got a mixture of the two things, so it's a bit of a difficult topic for many petrol heads. But I want to make the case as to why this Porsche SUV Coupe makes more sense for the Porsche brand than any other car brand, and why it's more of a Porsche SUV than the normal Cayenne. But to do that, we have to go back in time in a way that only we can at RBR and really look at the origins of the Cayenne. Now, we must begin in 1992. At this time, believe it or not, Porsche were on the verge of almost disappearing because of financial trouble. They'd just posted sales numbers of only around about 6,000 units for the whole year. And they were hundreds of millions in debt at this point because they were only selling two-door sports cars that were very expensive in a production facility in Zuffenhausen that was archaic in its methods. So something had to change, and then entered Wendelin Wiedeking. And I had to search up how to pronounce that, and yet I've still probably buggered it up. Now, this gentleman was the head of production, just turned at Porsche, and then became the CEO. And he had a very specific plan of how to save a company that he loved, but he knew was about to disappear. His plan was simple: to axe the models that weren't doing well, namely the 928 and the 968, and then to make the production more efficient. So he brought in the Japanese and changed the entire workflow of the Porsche factory, and he had to lay off some jobs to do it as well. But what we ended up with was a brand new 911 and the new Boxster, which was closely related to the 911, two cars that were being produced much more efficiently. But this would still not help if we had another financial slump in the world like we did back then. All these changes helped bring a more solid foundation, but he still had his ace up his sleeve. He knew that the current Porsche owner still had one or two other cars, perhaps a saloon and an SUV, and in their biggest market, the USA, it was the SUV, and he was further spurred on by the arrival of the new ML and the X5 from fellow German car makers that were doing exceedingly well in the USA as well. Thus entered the Porsche Cayenne. Now, this was of course shared on a platform with the VW Touareg. Every other element was unique to each manufacturer, but despite that, the purists of Porsche and the petrol heads, most of us, were in uproar because, well, let's be honest, it's probably one of the most hideous looking SUVs to ever grace the face of this blue planet. However, this ugly duckling brought in sales, profits and cash, the likes that Porsche had never seen before. And I think it was summed up best by Business Week, who said, this is an SUV that can tow an entire automaker. And it was true. Because of this car, we ended up with things like all the GT product we love, you know, the 918 hypercar as well. Yet despite that, despite the fact that it had a very plush interior, a lot of Porsche know-how, a Porsche engine, a very good off-roading system, it was just too high. It was far too heavy, and it was bloody ugly. So something had to give in order to make this a real Porsche, and then entered the Cayenne second generation. Now, whereas the previous one was more SUV and less Porsche, this one brought the scale back towards the Porsche side. You can see we've got a much more sloping roofline. The front end is particularly much more Porsche than the last car. The rear is so improved with the tail lights going back into the boot, and just generally the shape. It's lower, yes, it's longer, but it's wider as well. And the whole stance of it, just so much better. And more importantly, it was 250 kg lighter. The interior was on another level compared to the previous car as well. And this is where I really think the Cayenne hit its first real stride in terms of convincing us, the petrolhead community, that it could be a good looking car. And in fact, all the road tests prove that this was the dynamic king versus its rival, whereas the previous car really wasn't like that. It was after the advent of this car that came the smaller and now much better selling Macan. Now this to me is really the true Porsche SUV. It's small, it's got that lovely roof line, it's really, really nimble. It is truly the first SUV that was a sports car on stilts. Now we have a lot of them, the Macan being a very impressive car. Then after this followed what we are looking at today, and that is the third generation of the Cayenne. Now this new Cayenne is based on the MLB platform as shared across VAR Group with other manufacturers like Audi, Bentley, the recently tested Urus that we did. But unlike the Urus where you found tons and tons of Audi stuff, as we know with the Macan versus the Q5, that shared element means absolutely nothing because the final Porsche product is always very, very different. Of course, that is the case here as well. Now the entire outer shell of the car is made of aluminium. The wheelbase is about the same, but the car is a little bit longer, it's a little bit wider, and it's a little bit lower. Again, the same thing that happened between the first and the second generation, happening here between the second and the third, giving the car more of a Porsche stance. Of course, things have changed internally as well. We've got a brand new Tiptronic S 8-speed gearbox in this car with sportier ratios. We've got a 3-camber air suspension system. We've got 4D chassis control in this car, and the Porsche Dynamic chassis control system has now become electrically operated rather than hydraulically. So the whole roll stabilization thing acts a lot quicker than before. We also get mixed tires and rear wheel steering, just like in the 911. And as Porsche CEO Oliver Blume says, this car has never shared as much with the 911 before. But today we are, of course, looking at the Coupe. So why do I think that this works better? Of course, Coupe SUVs are all about design, and Porsche are so much about design. The whole lifestyle of owning a Porsche, the whole heritage of Porsche is about design. So we can't just brush that under the carpet, especially when we're talking about an SUV as well. So if we just look at the general highlights of this car compared to the previous generation, if we look at the front end, we have got a more aggressive front mouth here. And I want to compare it directly to what 992 looks like. You will see a lot of similarities in the shape of the air intakes, where you've got your active aerodynamics in the front, where the light sits, how the greenhouse looks compared to the front bonnet as well. The A-pillar, of course, swoops back more compared to the standard car as well, accentuating the idea of a coupe and looking more 911. But to me, it's the shoulder line that really speaks to it, as well as the roof line. I mean, if you brought a 992 here and we kind of fattened it up a little bit, you basically got a Cayenne Coupe, haven't you? This coupe benefits from that same roofline that we're accustomed to in the 911. It benefits from that strong shoulder on the rear. If you look at the rear of the car, it's got that single bar light, just like in the brand new 992 as well. A lot of people say it looks like DBS, but as I always say, Porsche have the single bar light thing. It's not an Aston Martin thing. Now, in terms of the coupe, it's not just a roofline change. We've actually got a wider rear on this car, and that's been done to give a bit more space inside to the rear occupants. In fact, the seats in the rear have been dropped in this car in order to give you the exact same head height that you get in the estate version, which is absolutely brilliant for buyers. The Cayenne Coupe also benefits from active aerodynamics. So we've got the rear wing that moves at the back, as you can see there. Now, it doesn't look particularly good in pictures, but this is Porsche. They're caring more about how the car performs than how it looks on the run. Apart from that, we've also got quite aggressive looking rear exhaust, as you can see. I like to call them shotguns. I mean, what other way can you use to describe this? But again, that very, very 911. The whole thing looks much more Porsche. Use the old blink test when you look at it. It looks more Porsche than the standard Cayenne estate to my eyes. Now, while SUV coupes have reduced practicality, we are looking at a Porsche car, not just an SUV. So the fact that it has reduced practicality in order to gain more design from its flagship car, for me, is a trade-off worth making, and it makes it more compelling than the Cayenne. Now, we've got some interesting options in the turbo car that we are driving today. Namely, one is the lightweight package, which makes a lot of design difference to this car. We've got the GT design type wheels on the Cayenne Coupe. The other good thing about the third generation car, you get bigger wheels than we had previously. The lightweight package also gets rid of the panoramic roof, and instead we've got a sloped carbon fiber roof at the top. You can also then see the carbon fiber diffuser at the bottom, which is part of that lightweight package. And there's some really cool details inside that I want to talk to you about with that specific package. But overall, you lose about 22 kg, which in a 2-ton car isn't much, but every little helps, I suppose. Now, to my mind, this is a very, very good looking car. In fact, I think it's probably the best looking SUV coupe that you can get at the moment compared to, say, GLE, Q8, X6, etc. It just doesn't offend me as much. I think it's just much better looking, and when you see how it drives, it only makes this even more compelling. Now, today we're looking at the turbo. This, of course, has a V8 4-litre engine in it, and it produces 540 brake horsepower, 770 Newton meters, 0 to 60 of about 3.9 seconds. It's impressive figures. We'll have to see how that feels on the run. But there are other variants of this car now as well. No longer do you get diesels in the new Cayenne generation. Now you can get an e-hybrid, or there is the turbo SE hybrid, just like we tested in the Panamera. That links that 4-litre V8 to the 8-speed, and in between there, we've got electrical assistance to give a further full horsepower of 680 brake in that particular car, 900 Newton meters, and a slightly reduced 0 to 60. But of course, it makes the car heavier. If you want to see what those cars are like, check out our Panamera SE Turbo Hybrid review to get just a general idea. Now let's head in, have a look at a quite special interior and see what this V8 sounds like in the Cayenne Coupe. Now, inside this Cayenne third generation is going to be a familiar looking place for a number of reasons. First, if you've ever seen our Panamera review or the new Panamera in general, this entire structure of the new Porsche Connect Plus system is going to look very, very similar to it. It's a much bigger screen here in the middle. It's all touch operated, and it's really, really quite easy to use. You can customize your home screen and have different widgets there. I've got a sports exhaust system, for example. But rather than going over all of that again, check out our Panamera review. I'll leave a link below in the description box, and you can see everything that this system does. One cool thing that I do want to point out about it is, however, you do not need to have your phone connected in order to make Apple CarPlay work, so it doesn't need a wire in it. And that really annoys me in other rival cars like the Mercedes, for example. And it's great, look, I can just use it touchscreen as well rather than fiddling around with knobs here and stuff. And it's all done wirelessly, which is brilliant. Of course, the driver's zone is classic Porsche. Much like the 911s of old, you've got the 5 circles, of course. 2 of these are actually digital screens where you can change the information based on what you want. I find it quite pleasing that this top dashboard reminds me of 992 in its structure. I'll show you what that looks like. Of course, you've got the Sports Chrono watch right in the middle. Steering wheel also gets the drive select here, as you would get in Sports Chrono package, with the sports response button with the different drive modes. We'll explore those while we're driving as well. So all of this here, very new Panamera. That reminds me of 911. This is all Panamera. The air vent position again reminds me of the 992 as well. Got some good cup holders here, some nice storage space, and then you've got handlebars which were made famous by the Cayenne, now conveniently been copied by the new GLE. You've got them on your door handles as well. I liken all of this to the Cayenne, so it's nice to see that there. I like the fact that this hasn't got the tiny little gear selector that you've got in the 992, and you can still shift this to the left, do some sequential manual changes as well. I just prefer that over those tiny ones that you get in the new 911 now. Generally, the feeling inside is that of a coupe. You know, you've got your dashboard a bit higher, the way the A-pillar kind of slopes down a lot more than the standard Cayenne. You've got your window line a bit higher. It all feels a bit more 911 on stilts, which is what I think you want in the Cayenne Coupe. Seats, of course, as well. They always make brilliant seats at Porsche. These turbo ones, absolutely no exception as well. Hug you really well. Very, very comfortable when you're driving normally as well. Now, the lightweight package that we discussed earlier does some interesting things inside. First of all, we get this fully Alcantara covered steering wheel. Now, regular viewers of the channel will know I love these because A, they're easy to take care of if you know how to. There's a video on the channel for all that. And they look and feel great in terms of having a sportier car. Now, the other thing that the lightweight package has changed, you get the Houndstooth fabric seats, as you would see in much rarer 911s and of course the classic Porsches as well. And it looks really, really nice against the black Nappa leather. I love this little touch, making this look more of a sporting Porsche. Unfortunately though, the lightweight package forces you to have 2 seats in the rear rather than the 5-bench option that you can get in this car. But there is one benefit, and that is less sound insulation, which means you get to hear more of the V8. So let's do that really quickly now. Let's see what this car sounds like. It's got a really powerful startup. I love doing the startup. Cold start is even more deep and rumbly, but you can do it again and again. It's replicatable. Let's turn the car back on. We'll do it in Sport Plus this time. Now, it's nothing like the modern AMGs, for example, but it's got a really nice and deep rumble to it without too many artificial pops and bangs. And when you go out on the drive, that's even more accentuated. Now, before we do that, a quick look in the rear of the car as well. So the rear seats have been dropped in order that we still get tons of headroom, in fact, the same as the normal Cayenne estate, which is brilliant. You can get a full 5-seat bench option. It's not limited like the Panamera Sport Turismo is, which is great. But as I said, if you get the lightweight package, you're kind of stuffed with that. But I want the lightweight package. I want to hear the exhaust more. It's a bit of a shame, but very comfortable in the rear. Lots of space, just as you would expect in something that is a Cayenne. Of course, luggage capacity in the boot has decreased, but there has to be some trade-off. It's such an obvious thing. Why are we even talking about it? So guys, let's see how this car actually does on the road. I've not had good experiences in the past with SUVs this size claiming to be dynamic. So I'm really curious to see what the Cayenne Coupe does. So let's head out right now. So on our RBR test track now with this Cayenne Coupe in its turbo form. Now, testing a Porsche is always a little bit more complicated than a normal car because there's so many options and variables, and you can really change what the car is like. So the car that we're driving today has about 10k worth of extra options that actually affect the way that the car drives. And these options are actually really important for this coupe. 2 of them you'll be a bit more familiar with when it comes to Porsche. So we've got dynamic chassis control, which of course helps control the main weight of the car better. Then we have Porsche Torque Vectoring Plus. Again, you'll be a bit more familiar with that. It controls the braking of the inner wheel as you're turning and controls the torque better, etc. Now, you would have heard of those. They're important options if you're going for a more sporty feel, but the ones that are a bit more unique to the coupe that we want to talk about, one is the lightweight sports package that we have on this car, and the other is rear wheel steering. Now, in a large car like this, that's going to make, and as we will see now, it makes a big difference. With those options together, we're looking at about 10k worth. But if you're going for a turbo, I cannot see why you would not get them, because they are absolutely crucial to the way that this car drives. And that brings us on to the handling element of this large SUV coupe. that, we're going to go into Sport Plus. Now, I've driven a number of the best known sport SUVs on these roads here. I'm talking about cars like the GLC 63S, which is the current Nürburgring record holder. I'm talking about the Stelvio Quadrifoglio, the one prior to that. And I'm talking about even more expensive ones like the Lamborghini Urus. So on the channel, I think we've all got a broad understanding of what a capable SUV sports car can do. And we have high expectations of Porsche as well. And let me tell you, the way that this Cayenne Coupe Turbo handles is incredible compared to other cars in this class of this size. It is really, really special. Let's break down what. We've got the rear wheel steering, but that by itself is not enough, as we found in the Lamborghini Urus, where you did not have good steering feedback. Just like in the 992, the steering feedback on this car, the feel of where the wheels are, how much you're turning, every element is communicated to you exactly when it should be, and that's really what separates this from the pack at the moment. There's none of the other cars in its class do it. The Urus is absolutely shamed by this car in terms of steering. You add the rear wheel steer to it and I can hit every single apex that I aim for, and that's all those systems coming into play, helping manage the weight of this car. And look, it is a heavy car. The turbo is like over 2 tons, but the way that it drives, I promise you, it reminds me of the GLC 63S and the Stelvio Quadrifoglio, which are much smaller, much lighter cars, exceedingly quick on the ring. I think in real world testing, of course, this wouldn't be as quick, but the point is, the confidence I'm getting, the way that the car is able to manage its weight and move toward the line that I want it to move toward, is really astounding for a car of this size. Really, really compelling to me how good the handling is. And it's not just on more exaggerated roads like that. A and B country roads, just daily driving, you really feel just how good, and you feel like you can do it with your fingertips. I think that's, a lot of you racing drivers will understand this as well. It's for an SUV, I'm not saying it's 992 level, for an SUV, it is genuinely bloody impressive. Next thing then is power. Now we've got only, I say, 550 brake horsepower in this car, and I say only because we're in a world of cars where 600 horsepower in, say, a saloon like an E63 or an M5 is very, very normal. But with that 550 brake and the 770 newton meters of torque, we're still measuring here 0 to 60s of, Christ, 3.7, 3.6 seconds. I mean, look, let's try it now. Let's do a little launch control, shall we? So foot on the brake, performance start. Whoa, that is fast. So we've measured significantly under 3.7 as well with this car. I really wonder then how fast the Turbo SE Hybrid is. Personally, I suspect that this turbo is still the sweet spot without the extra weight of the hybrid. It feels plenty fast. It's got a lovely growl to it, as we're going to come on to in a minute. But yeah, really fast. You really feel the torque. You're really encouraged to put your foot down and get again and again. And again, in real world driving, it's really usable. It's really useful. And you just want to do it again and again and again. If you're used to that kick you get from a Carrera 4S, kind of reminds me of that, especially the whole sloping roofline. It doesn't feel like traditional Cayenne in the cabin either. Right, now San, I'm going to go into sport for this. This is a particle filter car, as are all the new Cayennes and Cayenne Coupes as per EU law. So we have got the particle filter. If you don't know what that is, essentially it's part of EU law to reduce emissions, but it also has a knock-on effect of reducing the sound of the car, as we have seen in many of our recent reviews. But the pleasant thing about this 4-litre V8, shared with the Panamera as we saw in the Turbo SE Hybrid, but it's got a really, really nice rumble to it. You can make it pop and bang. And I found in daily driving, just in the low revs, you really get a nice V8 rumble to it. Just that, just setting off, you get a really nice rumble. And these days, when sound is at such a premium, I think they've done a really good job. You saw what the startups sound like. Those are great every single time you start up. Listen to that. I love that. It's a really sweet sounding V8. And I think the lightweight package with the stripped out sound insulation, it gives you a little bit more that you're really looking for when you buy a turbo. You can just come off the throttle, you get some nice little pops and bangs. SUV coupe is still an offensive term in the car industry for petrol heads. I think that's just something that we have to accept. And that is despite the huge number in sales that have helped manufacturers support their other products, particularly for Porsche with their SUV range, helping support the GT cars and the other sports cars, really giving us what we want on the other side. But when people look at the Cayenne Coupe, they come out with the same criticisms of the SUV Coupe, saying, well, you've got less practicality, you're paying more for less space, etc., etc. Yet those are the same people who will come out and say, well, why do Porsche even make an SUV? It's not purist. Now, my problem with this is that I think the Cayenne Coupe is more of a Porsche SUV in spirit than the Cayenne Estate is, and I want to make the case for that. We've seen how it draws more from the basic design language of the 911, just in lieu of being in coupe form. As when Porsche takes on any other rival, the steering, feedback and the handling in this car cannot be touched by current rivals. And in fact, you look at the other Verge group cars that share the platform with this car. Yes, I'm looking at you, much more expensive Urus. This car completely eclipses that car as well. And that's what I expect when Porsche come into a niche with a car that they are saying is sporty. I'm expecting them to be at the top, and they are with this car, again, in the spirit of a real Porsche. You get the right options in this turbo as well, with the lightweight package, with the Houndstooth interior, more sound coming into the cabin from the V8, and it's a really enjoyable car for a petrol head with all this poke that you have from the engine. And again, the coupe is more about design, and this just looks more Porsche, and really that's half the battle won in terms of looking at a Porsche SUV. And for a petrol head, this is thus less offensive to me than the idea of the original Cayenne was. I'm a big fan of SUV coupes that handle dynamically, and for this to handle and remind me of the GLC and the Stelvio, it's just simply a really good car. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this full review of the Porsche Cayenne Turbo Coupe. I've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed seeing how a larger SUV can handle this well. I'm looking forward to seeing what BMW and AMG specifically come out with to battle this in the coming months. But I need to enjoy myself more in this car, so as usual, I'm going to shoot off into this distance. Please do like and subscribe and share this video, and as always, I'll see you again next time.